Daphne, Joel, can I return to something you said a few moments ago, which was we seem to be obsessed with this notion of male brain versus female brain. We seem to need to have an answer to this issue of nature versus nurture. Do you think we should not be obsessed by this question?
Well, I think we should not be obsessed by the question. Are we obsessed by the question whether there is a essential difference between people with light skin color and dark skin color? Are we obsessed with this? This is not politically legitimate to even ask this question, is it? So why is it legitimate to ask the question whether males and females are fundamentally different? And I think the only reason to ask this question, and this is why we are obsessed with it, is we want to say that there are natural differences, because this justifies the different treatment of males and females in our society. And so this is a problem. And I think it may be important for some things, like, for example, for psychopathology or in medicine. But when we talk about behavior, there is no reason to look for the reason for the differences, because we don't need to justify them. So let's say there are differences, and let's say even we have a basis, a biological basis for this. So let's say we find that human males are indeed tend to be more aggressive than females. So what should we do with this fact, if we find it? There is no evidence for this in humans, but let's say it is true. So should we let men be violent towards other men and towards women, or should we actually educate men better not to be violent? Maybe we should just screen the population to people that have the high tendency to be violent, males or females, even if there are more males like this, and just, give them special treatment not to be violent, because violence is not good in our society. And in fact, this is what we do. So we do not, aggression, of course, is natural. If you look at any animal, if it is disturbed, it is aggressive. But all our society is built not to allow this natural aggression to be produced. So we educate our kids from a very young age, and when we are older, we have police, we have courts, we have prisons. Everything that we do is against our nature. But then we come to the sex differences, and then we look for nature for guidance, and we look for nature to allow these differences or to justify them. When in fact, even if there are a biological basis for these differences, we should act against these differences. So if we think that empathy is an important quality in our human behavior, then if men are by nature less empathic, we should treat them to be empathic. And if assertion, the ability to be assertive is important, then girls should be assertive too. This is why I think we are obsessed in this question just because we want to justify these differences. But this is a political issue, it's not a biological issue.
To take us right back to the beginning of a person's life. And I want you to tell us about a study done by Simon Baron-Cohen, Borat's cousin, right? Okay, Sasha's cousin, in which one-day-old infants are observed on how they react to objects and faces. What does the study tell us?
Well, boys don't react to faces as much as girls do, and they seem to be more attracted to movement. And according to Baron-Cohen, that's an example of prenatal testosterone-induced differences in people versus thing processing, or he calls it actually empathizing versus sympathizing. And his body of research is quite powerful because he looks at prenatal testosterone levels in fetuses and then later, after they're born, correlates those levels with a variety of observable behaviors. One of them is eye gaze, but there are others. So for example, increased testosterone is associated with increased light for rough and tumble play. That's another one. So, and the effects are actually quite large. So the importance of the study is that it's very difficult to associate that particular effect with a socialization explanation. I wanted to make a comment quickly on the issue of whether or not gender differences and racial differences, for that matter, are politically legitimate domains of inquiry. First of all, I don't think there are politically illegitimate domains of scientific inquiry. There's just scientific inquiry. I mean, with racial differences, for example, it's the case that the causes of elevated blood pressure, for example, in black Americans versus white Americans are not the same. Black Americans tend to be more salt sensitive than white Americans. And that actually happens to be an important thing if you're a black American with high blood pressure. And there are other differences in disease propensity as well. So for example, Jewish people, especially the European Jews, have a tendency towards an increased propensity of certain kinds of neurological diseases. And so you can't, there's no reason to ignore those. The question is, what do you do with the findings? And that's the moral issue. But part of the reason you want to get it right is because people take their guesses about gender differences, which are usually ideologically informed, and so they're global and not specified and usually not based on any data, and then they make political decisions that are predicated on them. And so in Scandinavia, for example, the presumption has always been that the reason that there are more female nurses than male nurses is because of socialization differences. And then the consequence of, you might say, so what? But the consequence of that is that there are continual movements by people who are obsessed with equality of outcome to ensure that that stops being the case.
Okay.
And you can think of that as a form of coercion.
Okay, here's a clip from a Norwegian documentary that we want to play. It's called The Gender Equality Paradox. And it asks the following question. Why is it that in Norway, which is one of the most, of course, egalitarian countries anywhere in the world, surprisingly large percentages of men and women chose traditionally gendered professions? Roll the clip, please.
The more you free people in society, the more you open opportunities for people to do anything they want, the more likely it is that any kind of genetic predisposition they have will be able to express itself.
In the gender egalitarian countries like Norway, you really are free to follow your inclinations. You know, in a poor country, you're probably worried just about getting a job. You just want a job. And if it's computers that are going to get you that job, in India, for example, you'll go for it, even if you're a woman. But, you know, in gender egalitarian countries, North America and Europe, I think people feel freer just to pursue what they're truly interested in. And my point is, men and women are interested in somewhat different things.
Daphne, let me go to you on this for your reaction. Does this go against your position?
I think it's surprising. But I think, for example, in the video, because I saw the entire video, so they say that women have 480 days of vacation of maternity leave, and men have 60. That's for equality, right? So if we find later that women stay more with the kids, is this because this is what they want to, or this is because the law gives them 6 times as more days at home with the baby compared to the father? So I think, again, it is surprising. I am surprised by the findings there. But whether this is this clearly shows that there are still differences. Whether there are gender differences and sex differences, again, you will never get from me another answer, because it's not a gender-free society. And if it's not a gender-free society, we can't say that this is the effect of sex. There is still gender there. There are still expectations, different expectations of men and women. You can also see it by the laws that they have. And maybe there, women can quit from the 2 careers that we currently have to make. Because what happened is, with feminism, it was very successful in bringing women out of the home, but it wasn't successful in bringing men into the home. And women were left with 2 careers. So now they have both to have a career and do things outside the house, and also to take care of the kids. And maybe, you know, it's too much for many women. And maybe if they have to choose only one, they prefer to choose the kids. But maybe if men were also more at home, then women can have it both also. So we can't really tell what that this says, because it's not a gender-free society.
We're down to just a few minutes left here, so let me get Jordan and Margaret to both comment on this relatively briefly, if you don't mind.
Sure. Sweden and the Scandinavian countries are the closest to gender-free countries that have ever been produced. And the consequence of that with regards to certain occupations is precisely and absolutely the opposite of what the social constructionists would have predicted. The gender differences have got bigger. They're bigger for interest, they're bigger for occupational choice, and they're bigger for personality.
Do we know why?
Well, the woman in the documentary said it properly. What happens is that if you flatten out environmental variability, you reduce it to 0, all that's left is biological variability, so it maximizes. And one way of thinking about that is that that allows people to follow their innate predispositions. And that can't be dismissed as a story, There's tens of thousands of people who've participated in these studies. And the most important thing is it precisely contradicts the social constructionist hypothesis.